these big family groups. You've been with them, you understand how they think, how they operate. When they expand, what's their philosophy when it comes to expanding? Is it acquiring? Is it setting up
I
by
think it's
themselves?
more, from my experience, it's more around acquiring. They're very much around acquiring businesses to get an investment return. Whether they're in them for the long term is debatable.
Yeah.
But a lot of them look at it from purely an investment, which is why the investment arm, I believe, is very, very focused and very concise in what it's trying to achieve. So you get a lot of CFOs, you get a lot of companies and family offices where they're focused on having certain businesses that they have a majority stake or a stake in that give them a return. And that's where they, especially in this part of the TCC, focus on. When you look at the investment funds, the governments, they're all in big businesses, but at a localized level, they're about buying companies or investing in companies that they see a return on.
And what are usually the types of companies they look for? More experience, sizes, industries.
To be quite honest, I think it's about a diverse portfolio. A lot of them not necessarily stick to one specific industry. There's a lot of variation from the interactions I have. A lot of them look for new emerging businesses that could take something like sustainability or something on crypto or whatever, but they look to invest in them early, especially when the business is seeking investment and in a return for scaling the business. And a lot of the times businesses won't scale until they have the investment to do it. So that's where they kind of fit in. Depending on the size of the family business, it depends on what they want to invest in. Some of them invest in assets, others invest in businesses, some diverse between both. So it depends really on what their overall strategy is for investing.
And what do they, like, I'm assuming always, family businesses, they're aggressive. They want to monopolize, they want to preserve the wealth.
Yeah. No, definitely.
So that means they follow strategies that help them achieve these objectives. How do I monopolize? I can. And how do I achieve or sustain the wealth, or maybe even increase it?
Yeah. Wealth increasement. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question that's always comes in my mind is, how do they, if they're looking at acquisitions, are they looking at acquiring new verticals, or they're looking to expand into, like, vertically into, like, the supply chain to maximize efficiency?
I don't know whether they would do the second part to maximize efficiency. I think it would be more around they would invest into the business to expand it, rather that they would let the operation. I don't know if family offices would get too involved in on the ground operation. It would be more around how do they scale it and how do they move it forward and how do they invest in it. Some of them would invest in a little section of it. So they might they see that the development of the senior leadership team needs that, but the business is not big enough to afford that. So they'll invest in that way. So they do it in various ways. It depends purely upon what kind of business they're doing and how much they want to invest in it and what they see as the future potential. So there's a lot of bit around, you mentioned earlier, around the CFO and what they do and how do they understand what it all links into. Some of them will have purely CFO and chief investment officers. Some of them won't. Some of them will amalgamate, roll into one. It depends how they specifically want to do it and how big the office is and the investment scope available, I suppose, is where it kind of sits.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of family businesses with varying sizes and they work in different ways. So that would be my view. It just depends on what their whole strategy is. If they have built it, they're just setting off, you never know.
Yeah.
You might have something different.
Lawyers, basically, where they only highlight, not all of them, some of them, they only highlight what's wrong, what could go wrong.
Yeah.
And they don't give you a solution. So are risk experts or the area of risk, is it the same? or is there a way to think about it, or maybe frame it in a critical analytical thinking
I,
approach?
I think from a lawyer point of view, from a legal point of view, you can, and the difference between legal and risk is legal will very much be around the impact on regulatory scenarios. Risk is more around looking at it from a view of we want to move forward and we want to go. So this is a risk. What mitigating action do we need to do? That doesn't necessarily eliminate the risk, because I think sometimes people get caught in the yes and no scenario or the right and wrong when you can't. Not in business these days. Business can be there's a lot of ambiguity around business and how it works. Risk is more around understanding the risk and saying, okay, what actions can we put in place that limits the risk to the business? With the legal side of things, you can be very black and white, because you are required to do this to achieve this regulatory wise. But I think that's where you'll kind of get a little bit of a difference if I was doing something in relation to a legal person, because there would be a very much a yes and no, this is what we need to do. My argument would be, yeah, okay, if we don't do that, what's the risk of us not? And it might well be you have to do it, because that's what legally you've got to do, or you can't get certified, or you can't get registered, or you can't get a license, or you can't, there's licenses that are required in the UAE to be able to trade. We're in a coffee shop, they can't trade without a license, and there's certain things they need to do to get that license. They're non-negotiable. You don't get the license, you don't do it, you don't get the license. And I think what the risk function comes in is around, okay, what's the risk of not doing it, but also what do we need to do to enable us to get the license in the most cost-effective way, rather than, and I'll give you an example. Previously we've opened a store where there's been a requirement for a certain amount of equipment that's needed to open, but actually when you challenge, you can get away with a lot less. So there the risk is highlighted around, okay, we can still do the same thing, but we don't need to do it in quite such big detail and big cost to enable us to do it, because the cost is too much. So we can do certain parts of it and still achieve the goal. Whereas when you look at it from one point of view, you go, well, I need to do this and this is the answer. Well, that's not very flexible. Really.
Yeah. What about, we're talking about, again, going back to the critical analytical thinking, there is a concept of deductive reasoning when it comes to saying this is what we're trying to achieve by this date, like the example of opening a store in Dubai by this date. How can we plan it or build up the timeline, especially if you're working with the project management team? Or how does the nature of that discussion go? Because usually with CEOs of startups, I've been there, I've worked with them as well. I would say we want to ignore all the challenges, because somehow we believe if we ignore it, we won't have to deal with most of it. And when it comes, we'll deal with it. When the issue comes.
I think that goes down to the project management team in relation to how do they plan all of the things. With experience comes these scenarios that you can work around. And sometimes you can outsource your project management, and they're specialists. I know of a specialist company that actually comes in and builds the store for you, and then you just basically at handover pick it up. And in the background, you're doing your regulatory or legal, whatever, registration, whatever it is you need to do. So I think it's more around the understanding of a timeline and a process to follow, and whether you outsource or whether you don't, or if you're big enough to have an in-house team, fair enough. If you're not, then you'll outsource. With outsource comes a bit more, you would hope, a bit more guidance and project management experience to deliver on time in full. But in this part of the world, it's not guaranteed. All you need is a hold up in the government side of things, and you can be behind schedule. And that's where you kind of need to give a little bit of leeway in your project timelines for slippage and work around that. But you can get held up quite considerably with government, especially if they you're not adhering to what they want in the way that they want it. And that's where your in-house or your outsourcing works with it.
And how does your relationship, work, or the dynamics work between the CRO and the CFO?
Very much together, really, to be quite honest. I always look at it from a point of view. The CFO is your cash and your finance and everything, to make sure that keeps the cash flow coming, keeps the numbers correct, keeps if you've got whatever targets you've got, their targets are on track. But they're all from a financial side. So it's one arm of it. It's not the other arms that link together. And reputational and operational. They're not financial sides of things. They're business. So the CRO works very closely with all of the board members or senior team to understand the risks from their specialist function and pull them all together. Now, it doesn't mean to say that the CRO picks up all of the work, and they don't. That's not their job. They're not a specialist in finance, potentially not a specialist in property. Then whatever area it is, they're not a specialist in that. What they do is they pull the risks out of there, understand how they impact the business, put in and understand with the stakeholder what the mitigating action is that you need to take to reduce those risks. And you pull it all together into, there's AI systems coming on board all the time, but the risk register goes in, but they're being automated as you go along, especially with the invention of AI. It can make the efficiency very much better using the tools, but the tools are coming on board thick and fast, and they improve all the time. So I suppose the challenge to everybody is, what's the system you're going to choose? But you amalgamate them all into one place, and then on a very regular basis. I think a lot of the time people don't realize that quarterly and half yearly and yearly reviews are now not enough. With everything that's going on in the world, the geopolitical unrest that we have and the chaos, because it's classed as chaos now, it's past the unrest and every other level, it's a chaos level. You can't leave it a quarter or a half year or a year in order to review. You need to be reviewing on a weekly basis. And that's where you work closely with all of the CFO and all areas of the CIO anywhere. And the CEO, you just link with them all to understand where the risks are and how you help mitigate them. But I think sometimes, especially in a smaller business, the senior team will fall back into, like, CRO's got it now, they'll pick it up. And that's not true. That's not the way it works. You've got to disseminate it out into the various stakeholders, because they're vested interest in reducing that.
Like the CRO is the custodian of the risk,
Yes.
but then everyone is involved.
Totally.
They have their own area
Totally.
of ownership.
And that's why it's important to, look, everybody will be thinking, okay, well, he's got a big long list of 20 top 20 risks. You're going to go through those every week? No, you're not. No, all you're looking at is the action working, and is there a need for review? Sometimes there might be that the actions you put in place, you only need to look at 3 or 4, but you've got to keep reviewing it, whereas it used to be reviewed every quarter or reviewed every half year. You can't do that anymore. There's just too much going on. When you only have to look at Donald's tariffs and the unrest that caused, and actually the impact on margins and supply chain and cost of moving things around. You start whacking on 200-300% tariffs, and all of a sudden something that used to cost $1 now costs 3 times as much. So I think that's where people and businesses, where the reaction time of the CRO now is more important than it ever was. And how much they have to do to assist the business and in making unrestful waters a bit calmer.
So we'll park the CRO discussion. I think we have a good view of that. Thank you. Now, maybe I'd like to focus more on you. How did you get into this field? How did you get into this area? Where did you start? Because it seems, I can see the passion in your eyes, and you're talking about
No, I've done I started off here in the UK, and one of the things I've always tried to do throughout my career is to learn and innovate and develop my own skill sets. Starting off in the UK in the supermarket industry, FMCG. Sainsbury's was a big, second biggest supermarket in the UK, and I learned leadership and management, and as you go up the ranks in businesses in the UK, it's all around how do you deal with people and how do you deal with the kind of operation that I did. So I did the operational side of things for a long, long time, and then moved on to Travis Perkins and Wicks, which was a bit different in relation to it was a trade merchant, different mentality, but I learned a lot around margin and commercial acumen there. So you learn leadership. I learned leadership at the first instance, and then commercialism in the second half. So I built a career up around knowing the operational side of the business, and then also the back end of it. So your commercial side, your margins, your profit and loss, your cost of goods, and all of that, how it links into what you don't necessarily see when you're in the front end. Yeah, and your front end is all around customer. So running call centers, managing stores, all those types of things, and then also being in a support function, you learn an awful lot around the whole areas of the business. And that's always what I've tried to do. One of the things that brought me out to the Middle East was the challenge around moving from a one-trick pony, so to speak, which is basically what Sainsbury's is. It's a retailer, it's a supermarket, that's all it does. And moving into Alshaya was a challenge for me because it was 80 different cultures, thousands of stores spread over multiple countries. And that's a different style of leadership. And that's a different style of remote working that you have to kind of deal with. So pulling all together all that I'd learned in the UK and then developing a framework of risk, part of the bit around Travis Perkins and Wicks was, although I learned the commercial acumen, I also learned steering groups and how do you bring all your stakeholders on board in relation to building a risk framework. So what I implemented into Alshaya was basically the framework of risk. So understanding where the risks are, the potential risks that are coming. So, when companies move into e-com, and there's a risk around online fraud rather than fraud at the front end. You've got corporate fraud. So you've got to bring all those risk frameworks together and building that over 15 years, 16 years in Alshaya, you're building up a framework around all areas of risk. And so starting off and implementing enterprise risk management frameworks into a company like Alshaya, which was moving like a bullet train in expansion. It takes a little while longer to get that framework set up. And so that was what brought me into really driving risk and understanding how it affects every part of the business, because it does, whether it's people, whether it's operations, whether it's supply chain, whether it's finance, it doesn't matter where it is. And so you'll learn as you move into new markets, the risks going into the new markets. As you go into e-com, the risks on e-com. As you go into loyalty apps, and online loyalty and data. So setting up a data protection office in Alshaya was huge because things were moving so fast. There was a strategy moving into online and Aura and applications like that. That's to roll out in every country that they operate in is a massive challenge. Why? Because in the Middle East region, every country has a different version of data protection. So you have to adapt 14 different ways to make sure that you can roll it out. And if you can, and then it's about how do you capture the data. So you link with the information security office all the time. So you're working on how do you protect the data in one aspect and how do you capture the data in another, and who has access to the data. So that's all about risk and all about how the framework's set up. I did a lot of understanding of how one of the things around risk is you don't reinvent the wheel, you just adapt and modify to sit in relation to what we describe as an international standard. So a lot of the times you hit ISO standard, and that gives you a framework and basis for, so whether you're going 31,000 or whether you're doing AI 42,000, it doesn't matter. Your framework is there under international standards. And then what you do is you look at each individual market and say, okay, what are we covering? Because if you try and write, say, for example, in this case, 14 different procedures and policies, then people will never know what the scores are. And you have one basis policy that goes with ISO standards. And then if there's an idiosyncrasy, it's an addendum in the policy. It's a lot easier to run and a lot easier to manage. But these things take time because in the Middle East, and to be quite honest, around the world, AI policies are changing all the time. Data policies are changing all the time. So you're constantly, when you go back to talking about risk and you talk about what the CRO's role is, why do you need to review it every week? Because it might well be that the UAE and Saudi bring out a change to their policy on data, and then Qatar does, and then Bahrain does 3 weeks later, and then 4 weeks later, Egypt does. And you've got to keep on top of that. Otherwise, you could potentially incur reputational damage or financial damage by not doing it properly. So in my whole career has been built across learning and understanding and innovating as we go along. And change management is fundamental to that. And a lot of the times I've tried to embrace change to make sure that my learning moves forward. In doing my master's I did it in leadership and innovation, because that helps me understand how innovation in marketing, for example, works and what's the risks associated with that. Capturing data, doing different marketing activities. So it's all been around constantly learning and constantly adapting to the changing environment that is businesses. And now it's kind of, for me, that I feel really proud that it's more amplified now because of the geopolitical chaos we're in, where businesses are changing and having to adapt and pivot, as we've done all the time. So that's really what's been me throughout my career is to try and make sure that I keep learning and keep adapting and keep innovating ways of working.
Amazing. Thank you. And you touched on very important an important point, which is how do you get people? There is a people factor, right? When it comes to adapting, implementing these policies.
Yeah.
And you mentioned instead of having too many documents, put them in one. How do you get everyone aligned? What are the common challenges you face usually when it comes to change management, getting everyone?
I think,
and how do you sustain it as well? That's
yeah, you're right. No, there's a couple of things for me. You've got to. There's a psychological aspect in relation to change, and some people, you've got they call it the bridge version, where some people will sit one side of the river, some people will sit on the bridge, and other people will embrace the change and go over the other side of the river, and they'll adapt the change and they'll move on very quickly. And the people that sit on the bridge are just hedging their bets in relation to how the people that went over the river have adapted. And then there's people that are on the other side of the river, they just won't change. And I think that's the thing around, if you've got the cultural side of aspects of businesses is around it's about the timing of individuals and how they work in relation to change. With risk, there's a little bit of a topic around, do people understand culturally that risk is very important, or do they not see it at all? And that's the culture of the business. And how do you change that? That's a long period of time to do it in. And it starts with capturing every person. In my view, it starts with capturing every person that comes into business. So everybody new to the business. Everybody existing is a different scenario. Everybody new in the business needs to understand this is what risk is, this is where we're going, this is what code of ethics is, this is what your governance is, they need to understand that first, because that's, once they understand how it links into the business culture of the actual organization, then you're able to kind of move forward with those people. The turnover in the business is always going to be an issue, depending on how much turnover you have. But I think then what you need to do is look at what's your main points. Going back to the policy bit, the standard around international standard is the basis mark, and then you have addendums. So you might have different inductions in an immersion packages in each country, depending upon what the regulatory requirement is for that particular country. But I think what you've got is a long journey around constant over and over again. Sometimes companies take the view of the carrot and the stick. Okay, depending upon how the leadership team wants to work, you can do it in a number of different ways, but you need to constantly revisit and constantly educate people. And I think that's very underestimated of how hard that is. Just giving somebody a 20-minute video on something is fine, but you've got to keep going and relating to making it interesting. You know, my philosophy on training has changed over the years, where instead of it being, I mean, they always used to say, I think there's a terminology around death by PowerPoint. You know, I don't use that anymore. I use things that make it more interesting for people to do. So it might be a story challenge where, for example, they're a detective and they're trying to find stuff, but it makes it interesting and engaging. And you've got to make it engaging to get the message across. It's very hard in some topics. And I always remember there was a little bit of a challenge around information security, around, you know, clicking on the email link, checking where it's from. Is it, you know, I'm phishing, all those kind of emails that go on. But I think you just got to constantly keep changing and keep engaging people on it, because they'll see it as we did this last year. Okay, yeah, you did it last year, but you've still got to keep going, because the hackers, as we've seen and talked about with Marks and Spencer's, they change all the time. And it doesn't necessarily need to be in through the business. If you look at Marks and Spencer's was hacked through the supplier that had a link into the business. So everybody's got to be aware. And even it just means, instead of just clicking on something, hovering over something to see whether that link comes from. Now, I had an email the other day, and I looked at it, it was just like too good to be true. And I was like, okay. And I was about to go, oh, yeah, let me. And I went, oh, wait. And just looking at the email address and then doing a little bit of research for 2 seconds on whether that email address was legitimate helped me say, okay, I did click on it because it was legitimate. It was from a legitimate company. But sometimes you just need that. It can be too good to be true. Because what you don't want to do, and I mean, I've had friends of mine that actually, they have been hacked, and you just don't want to go through it. It's not a nice experience. It's horrible when you, for example, lose your Facebook account and then they get everywhere and then they're selling stuff in your name, and it can be a nightmare.
How do you balance with change management, between motivating people, educating them, implementing controls to change the ritual, or through rituals, or changing the habits, so that you get exactly what you want? Get them to operate exactly in the same way.
It's super hard, and I don't think there's any one formula that you can do. I think it depends upon, from my experience, in Alshaya, people in Kuwait react differently to people in Saudi, react differently to people in UAE, for example, on this, basically on the demographic background. And you have to really adapt and be flexible. It can't be a one size fits all, I feel. You've got to adapt, you've got to be flexible, and you've got to work at what fits best for that particular market. Sometimes you go more in depth with more detail. Other times you can step back and go, okay, we can give you this overview and it will work. We moved towards a matrix format for data protection, where the people that worked more with data, we gave them more training than people that didn't. Because there is also a question from a human perspective as well, what has it got to do with me? And if they don't feel that there's an engagement in relation to, it doesn't affect me, so I'm not really going to bother, then you're lost. You have to, we brought it down into low impact, medium impact, and high impact. People with high impact, where there was a lot of data. So like the people function, part of the people function has a lot of impact on personal data. You train them more than you do, for example, somebody that has no interaction with it. It might just be a picker for a store, for example, in the depot, or somebody just picking stuff in admin that's just filing, just general paperwork. They have minimal impact on data, personal data that affects them. So they don't need so much. And if you did give them that, you'd be going, well, I don't deal with any data, so they're going to switch off. So I think you've got to have this fine balance between engagement and not, and how you change and develop that education piece over the course of time. Because it's difficult. It's not a simple one size. There's not. And so that's where you kind of have to, what I got down to was what worked was specific areas needed more than others for that particular topic. For information security, for example, the whole company needed to do it because everybody has emails. So you can't miss anybody then. So you've got to, I think there's a very much around know your customer and know what is needed to fit what they want. And it's very important to understand, especially when you're looking at from risk point of view, or you're looking at it from anything, from a people point of view. You mean, we're not all robots, we're not all the same. And different people react to the different training methods in different ways. Some like to just do it on their own with a bunch of headsets. Some people like to do it in a classroom environment. Some people like to do it face-to-face on one-on-one. It just depends how you can adapt all of that into your training and your people side of things.
Thank you. What about supply chain? We're looking at suppliers and partners and channels. How do you, because these you have no control over them. They're external people, external.
Yep.
How do you formulate strategy? How do you look at it? How do you?
I think there's a way of I use the word partnership around engaging. There's a bit about risk in the background around making sure that you can always have a resilience towards the business. Don't forget you might have a policy on, for example, data retention or how that works, or systems. But when the bigger you get, the more suppliers you have, the more challenging it is around, what do those people within that company do and specifics that you have. So this is where the chief risk officer comes in relation to supplier partnership and what's the non-negotiables that the business has to do. So with suppliers, they are separate businesses. They are working their own business with their own challenges and their own ability to do. But they are a service provider to you, and as they are a service provider, as their customer, you have a right to challenge them on various bits. We used to do various visits to understand and liaison with various main suppliers. And I use the word main in inverted commas mainly because if you've got 3,000 suppliers out, you can't visit them all. You've just got to make sure that your main ones are bought into what your standards are within your business and what you're trying to achieve. So you work very well. I mean, with Alshaya, it's about franchisees. So working with the franchisees to make sure that their alignment, because they might have some bits that they can give to you and you can give to them. It's always a two-way street in relation to that. So it's a challenge, don't get me wrong, but I think it's more around you setting your standards out in the initial contract stage and what you do with your suppliers going forward and the checks and balances that you feel comfortable with. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes you want to outsource it. Sometimes you don't. So yeah, it's just around that kind of thing. You have to build partnerships and relationships with them so that it's an open, honest conversation. And I think that's what a lot of the supply chain logistics directors do, very much building relationships with the big suppliers that they use all the time and that they're in needing of. But it's also around, for example, the various divisions, making sure that the policy of the business is cascade. And I think that's sometimes where it can fall over a little bit.
Yeah.
Because the brand is interested in selling. They're not interested in the due diligence behind the scenes. It's a kind of an unknown that's missed sometimes where it can fall over.
What if there are multiple layers? Like, for example, you had maybe Shaya is not the right example. Like Carrefour, for example, with Majid Hussein. What if you've got like 2 layers of suppliers? How does that? Do you think that way as well? When it comes
You've got a primary supplier. You can, like I said, Yeah, going back to my Carrefour for Sainsbury's bits, I mean, there was always around backups. I mean, resilience is always around. You can't in the interruption of supply chain. Your main supplier always has a backup supplier, and you always diversified and challenge each other's around negotiation, around opportunity and delivery, and on time in full, and all those kind of things that go on in the background.
Yeah.
So the various layers are around diversification of ability to continue the supply chain all the time. It's a lot harder in the perishable side of things, because that's just the way. I mean, if a yield's down or the quality is rejected, I remember one of the things you get around running a call center and the support functions of call center was around the supply issues that used to go on, and all the time there used to be supplier failure because the quality was rejected and it wasn't to the standard that's required. Well, that can impact the business tremendously when it wipes out something very major, especially for seasonal product. So you always have to have a backup, and it's about whether that backup can cope with the volume that you're required. If it gets in an amount, a percentage of it, then fine, you can still keep production going, but sometimes you're wiped out. And so it's just around the resilience of getting back on track with that. So that's where you have to kind of, work very closely with, I use the word partnership again. It's got to be in a partnership, and you've got to be open and honest around, which are sometimes fails, but you've got to be open, honest to supplier to say, this is what we expect here. And if your QR rejects it, then what's the backup? Or do we need to diversify into somewhere else? So you do get that, and that's business resilience, and works in a different way.
Right. This is really helpful. Anyways, I think we covered a lot.
We have. It's been good.